good morning, everybody. I guess good afternoon at this point. I know people are still getting settled in, and that's fine. We'll have people still filling in your tables a little bit throughout, and if your table's empty by the time we get to group discussion, we'll resort you a little bit, so don't worry about it either way. Welcome on behalf of the Academic Advising Network and the Brown Bag Lunch Committee. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Doris Gruber. I am one of the advisors in the School of Management, and I'm really excited about today's topic that we're going to be discussing about the Academic Conduct Code. And so for those of you who don't know the Brown Bag Lunch purpose, if this is your first brown bag, basically we're trying to allow for facilitation of better understanding of the different facets of advising, both at BU and beyond. And so today we're going to be doing things a little bit differently than we've done at some of our other brown bag lunches. Rather than being focused really primarily on the panel and doing a back and forth question and answer, we'll do a little bit of questions for the panelists, and then really we're going to be spending the majority of the time working on some different cases. And so we'll do them in small groups. We'll report out to a larger group, so we'll all get to have our eyes on all of the cases, though each table will only be working on one. And that's the game plan, so we'll all discuss at the end. By the end of the session, here's what we hope that you'll gain. We want you to understand the basic framework of the academic academic conduct process. Some of you might have different relationships to the academic conduct code. Some of you may serve on committees. Other of you may have seen academic misconduct in your classes. And some of you might have just sort of seen the process going on around you, but actually have no involvement with the process at all. So we want to kind of demystify what that process looks like a little bit. We want you to understand what kinds of academic conduct cases arise on campus and why they might be tricky. And then we're going to evaluate, I wrote some cases, and so they're completely fabricated, no FERPA violation. None of them are going to be things, I mean, maybe they're things that happened, but if they are, I didn't know them when I wrote it. So they are plausible examples. Like I said, we'll try to demystify the process a little bit. It can sometimes seem a little quiet, and I think with our panelists' expertise, we'll learn more about what it looks like at Boston University and also in the field. And then we'll try to enhance your toolbox, so if you are a faculty member or an advisor who is aware of some form of academic misconduct, we'll hopefully be able to increase your toolbox a little bit. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, and actually I'll let them introduce themselves. And then, so Steve, Kabrina, and RD, when you guys introduce yourselves, can you share a little bit about what your relationship is to the academic conduct code, what your involvement is with the process, and RD, if you could share your experience with kind of misconduct in the field, plagiarism, and stuff like that. Yeah, so whoever wants to start.
I'll go. So I'm Steve Jarvi, Associate Dean for Student Academic Life and Arts and Sciences, and I actually chair our conduct committee. I'm a non-voting member. We have a conduct committee of 3 faculty, a student, and a staff member. When I first got here, we had multiple chairs and multiple committees, and that was great that we had so many people that wanted to be involved, but it really made sense to get some consistency. So that's my involvement in the process.
My name is Kabrina Chang. I am a clinical associate professor of law and ethics in the School of Management. I also am the chairwoman of the Academic Conduct Committee for the School of Management. Our committee is very similar to CIS's, 3 or 4 faculty, a student, and usually 1 administration representative. There was only 1 committee when I got to the School of Management, but we have probably heard everything out there. So that's my involvement.
I'm R.D. Sahl. I'm fairly new to this world of academia. You'll notice on my title it has the words "of the practice," which means I'm not an academic, I'm a street guy. I spent 40 plus years doing the news on television. And in that business, integrity, ethics, the truth, fairness are things you have to produce and prove every day of the week. and that's what I expect of our students. I am a member of our Academic Affairs Committee, but I've never actually, I'm fairly new to it, I've never actually been called to a hearing. And I can tell you that most of the cases that we encounter at COM are settled at the associate dean level, involving the student or students and the professor or professors involved. Frankly, I think that's where a lot of these things are best resolved. Why do you have to climb the escalatory ladder to nuclear war when you can find truth and reconciliation, appropriate punishment, appropriate sanctions, and a learning opportunity? So that's where I come from.
Thank you. Kabrina and Steve, specifically because you've worked with the academic conduct committees for some time now, can you tell us a little bit about what the process looks like, maybe from a student committing
Sure.
a violation? And
I'll go
from
first,
there?
and I promise to be quick. So CAS, well before I got here, instituted a policy where first offenses are done at the faculty level, usually resulting in a grading sanction, and the vast majority are resolved because the student admits to the infraction. We always apply an educational philosophy to this, and that's always makes me feel better because it realizes, it's not a legal process per se. It is educational and gives us a lot of freedom. So we entrust that the faculty will work with the student to ensure that it is an educative process. Those are all reported centrally because if it's a second offense or if it's an especially egregious offense, and in this case, I think that we should take it to a hearing, we will do that. But again, most are done at the faculty level except for second offenses or especially egregious offenses. We have staff in our office that meet with students to help them with this process. And that's a critical part of the process, and something that we continue to, I think, to get better at, so that they can sort of feel supported but also understand what's going on in that process. And I should also mention, of course, if a student denies that they've done anything, then that goes automatically to a hearing because that's their opportunity to bring their side of the story. So you would think we have lots of hearings. We don't really have that many, just to put it in some context. There are lots of first offenses, and lots of students learn from that and move on, and that's the good news. But you could say even one is too many, and we maybe have 8 to 10 hearings a semester. The vast majority are second offenses, students that have just done it again. Does that help?
That's good. Thank you.
The process in the School of Management is very similar, although it's new. We recently adopted the sort of all BU-wide process, which is the process that Steve just described. So we, in our undergraduate program, operate in an identical manner. There is this first offense sort of admission that the student and the faculty discuss it and learn from it, hopefully. We also, in our undergraduate program office, have wonderful advisors who are there to support the student, explain what they can expect, explain what the process is, and they're also wonderful supporting faculty, helping us understand what the process is because many faculty are unfamiliar and afraid of it. So there's a lot of work being done in our undergraduate program office to bring all of the parties together. The same is true in our graduate side, but oddly, our graduate program, up until very recently, like last week, actually had a different process. And it was sort of our old SMG process, which the graduate program is now being folded into the same sort of administrative process with the first offense and working it out with the professor. I think in the School of Management, informally, that was done more often than I know about, informally working it out with the professor so that there can be more learning. And in our graduate programs, it's the same, that there are advisors in the graduate program who help students understand what the process is, what's going on, what they can expect. We probably, I don't necessarily have a good handle on how many hearings we have a year. I don't think it's 8. I think it's smaller than that, and we do see a fair amount go sort of this informal resolution route. Those never make it to me. I just see the letters coming my way that this is how it's been resolved because the committee isn't involved in it. But the School of Management has undertaken a project to kind of spread the word a little bit about academic integrity, so that the association out there isn't, you're going to go to the Academic Conduct Committee and sort of be persecuted and tarred and feathered in the middle of the atrium. That's not really the message that we want out there. So the School of Management has undertaken a program led by a committee to really try and create a partnership between students and faculty to establish expectations on both sides for academic integrity. So we're trying to take a more holistic approach, not just you're going to the committee and you're going to get in big, big trouble. It's more of a holistic approach, what we all have to lose and what we all have to gain by fostering a culture of academic integrity. So there's a lot going on in the School of Management.
I agree entirely with Kabrina that it's about building a culture of ethical decision-making and integrity, personal integrity, academic integrity, professional integrity. And the opportunities for doing that at the lowest level, I think, are great. The aggravating factors, I think, that we can all agree on, paying somebody to do work for you is just, that's over the bar by a long shot. But that's the extreme kind of case. Plagiarism, we need to work on that. People need to understand what it is, how it works, what it is and what it isn't. I could probably do a better job talking about this. I put the code, a link to the code in all of my syllabi, and talk about it briefly on the first day of class. But I probably could and should do a better job explaining why it's important and what the consequences are. And then I also ask myself, these kids are 20 years old plus, 18 years old. They haven't figured out by now doing your own work is what it matters. Integrity matters. Credibility matters. Those are the coins of the realm, not only at this institution, but on your job and in life.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll try to consolidate into one last question so we can have enough time for case studies and such. In terms of the kinds of cases of academic misconduct that you see, either at BU or in the field with plagiarism, how often do you see things as being very straightforward versus really tough to discern what the answer is? And do you find anything in there especially interesting or difficult?
Straightforward. So nothing is straightforward. It seems like it's straightforward because the student has met with the faculty and the student, I'm so sorry, I was under a lot of pressure, I just cracked, I shouldn't have done it, it was stupid. That seems straightforward. But if it gets to a hearing, it's never straightforward. And mainly because it might be straightforward discerning if it is or is not academic misconduct. But from the committee's perspective, the real difficulty is what do you do about it? And RD mentioned aggravating circumstances, and we look at aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and all of these things come into play. And from my experience on this committee, our committee is rotating, by the way. I don't know how they do it in CAS, but it's just pools, and our undergraduate and graduate program find out who's around. So it's almost never the same committee twice. They struggle with what to do about it. Because they want it to be an educational experience, but we have to send a message, and we have to be reasonable, but we have to be consistent. And it is never straightforward what to do about it. Sometimes whether it's academic misconduct is not straightforward either. More often than not, we have a student apologizing and admitting, I'm sorry, this is why I did it. And I find those actually to be the toughest because it's a real struggle how to be reasonable and how to foster education at the same time, how to how to uphold the standards of the School of Management and uphold the standards of Boston University. So that part is never straightforward. But the student who brought the cheat sheet into the exam and said, oh, but I never used it, that's not that tough.
Some cases are pretty straightforward. I think all of us who deal with students in writing courses begin fairly early on to get a sense of students' voices and style and writing ability. And when you see things that are out of whack with that and run them through the computer, you sometimes come up with very obvious cases of things that have happened. And you deal with those. The issue of collaborative work is an interesting one, and I'd love to hear what the two of you have to say about that, because in a newsroom, there is a lot of collaborative work. You may be the face and voice on that story on the 6 o'clock news, but an assignment editor, an associate producer, a writer, a researcher, a tape editor, have all contributed something to it. So is it not that reporter's work? No, it is that reporter's story, but a lot of people contribute to it. Look at the New York Times. Often at the end of a story, a long, complicated story, there'll be additional reporting bylines at the end of the story. People have collaborated to produce the product. And under some readings of our academic code, there are violations if you work collaboratively.
I'll just say I agree with Kabrina, and to address RD's point, that one of the areas that is murky is when it's a collaborative, when people have collaborated. Sometimes they're encouraged to do it by faculty, but yet they don't draw the line at actually handing in separate work. And that might seem like a detail, but it's not. It's really important. So usually the fact that it's academic misconduct is clear, but then everything else is murky.
Thank you. For the next 10 to 12 minutes, there are cases that are sitting at your table. We're going to let you review what you might do if you were sitting on an academic conduct. Well, in some cases you'll be pretending to be the faculty member that this happens to, or what have you, but we'll all share with the group at the end. Kabrina, Steve, and RD will be available for consultation if you guys have questions in the process, and we'll report out to the group, so maybe designate a note taker for each of your tables. And also just 2 housekeeping notes. 1, RD has a class that he's teaching at 1, so he's going to scoot out about 15 minutes early, so don't be alarmed. And the second is, this is obviously being videotaped, so when we are reporting out to the group, we'll ask you to hold mics so that it can be heard on the tape later. That's all. Enjoy your case discussions, and we'll reconvene in a bit. All of your cases were numbered, so the first case is case number 1, and I'll read it because I have a mic already. John is a spring sophomore taking OChem and failed his first exam. Aware that a poor grade in this course could significantly impact his impending med school applications, especially considering that his grades are otherwise quite high and make him competitive for top med schools, John resolves that he must ace his upcoming lab assignment. While John is encouraged by his instructor to work in a group on his report, it is also made very clear that the work submitted must be his own. John did work quite hard on the report on his own, but was having a little bit of difficulty graphing some of the results. One of the people he worked with, Molly, had a beautifully crafted chart. Because they took in the same data, it would represent the identical data that he needed to provide. Figuring that there was no harm in asking to make use of Molly's graph as long as the prose was his own, he asked Molly if he could use the graph, and she agreed that it was no problem. The instructor noticed the clear duplication and faced a dilemma. It's obviously a violation of the conduct code, but a pre-med student will have a very difficult time getting into med school with any reporting of academic misconduct. If the instructor only decides to give a grading penalty on the assignment, John and Molly might still have the opportunity to be successful in the class and in their field. So who had case 1 in here? So table 5 and table 4. I'm going to give mics. All right. right, can someone from each table who had case 1 just say a little bit about what they thought of the case and answer some of the questions?
So we actually consulted with some outside help because we wanted to be clear about the implications for the academic misconduct being reported. Having myself never worked in this area at all. And it's our understanding that if this is in fact a first offense, that it probably wouldn't go on their transcript, but it would be reported somewhere in the record, but that the student would have an obligation ultimately to report this. Nonetheless, we decided that both are in error, although we were more sympathetic with Molly than with John. It's the educational opportunity to say, Molly could have shown you how she made her graph, and you could have learned from her. But we do think it needs to be reported and that they should get 0 for the assignment.
Thank you.
You were so much nicer.
Okay, so I think our discussion, we come from a variety of backgrounds at our table. So we had some questions about the sort of nitty-gritty details and how that might impact the outcome. But I think I'll address the questions almost a little bit backwards. We clearly felt that both students are guilty if they're guilty of the same thing. You know, they both, if this is misconduct, then they're both guilty of that. I think one of the points that we made is that it's not the instructor's responsibility to worry about the medical school implications necessarily. To like, what for this kind of offense, what would typically be the next step? Would it be a grading penalty imposed, or would it be a referral to the conduct committee? The instructor doesn't have to necessarily be responsible for owning the implications of this action, but looking at what is the precedent, what are the policies. We had some of our questions really were about how integral was this graph to conveying the information, the learning of information. If it is, then that of course is different than if a major piece of the assignment is to show that you know how to present these graphs, do the data, or another approach from some of us who aren't chemists, was the prose enough to convey? So if the student has his own prose and is writing this report, does that convey the information that's needed? Is the graph more an incidental piece, or is it an integral part of the assignment, in which case it might be looked at as more clearly a more serious violation? Did that kind of cover?
Yeah.
Victor?
Thank you. Panel, you guys have anything you want to weigh into this case, or does that sound similar to what you would have maybe weighed in?
I don't think I'm on. Am I on? I don't know. First of all, I love you don't own the future implications of that. That weighs heavily. It definitely weighs heavily on faculty's mind. I think I probably would have just asked, if I were the professor, which I am a professor also, I think I might handle it myself with an admission. If the data were true, and the graph I would see as formatting.
We did discuss the graph and kind of internally decided, this is chemistry. The graph is probably pretty important, which drove some of our thinking.
I don't know anything about chemistry.
I would only add that one of the challenges is, although you're right to frankly not think about the implications, it's their nature to do that. And they really care about students and they're concerned about them, and that is part of the challenge all the time.
Thank you.
John shouldn't have asked, Molly shouldn't have offered.
Or that's another way to put it.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to case 2. Can I see the hands of folks who did case 2? Great, we only have 2 mics, but Chris and Michelle can.
Excuse me, I
Get them
need
to
to take my leave. I have a class to teach at 1 o'clock. We'll be talking about ethics and integrity.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, so now we're talking about Kayla. Kayla is a first semester freshman and not at all confident in her writing skill. I'm sure something you guys never see. Her first draft of her Writing 100 paper was a bit of a jumbled mess, very unclear, very fragmented, and impossible to follow. She went to the Writing Center for assistance, and though they helped her a bit with basic structure, her content still left much to be desired. Kayla happens to be friends with Michelle, an upperclassman who had taken the course last year, so Kayla went to Michelle asking for help. Michelle took one look at the paper, realized it was very poor quality. Rather than talking her through potential edits, Michelle thought it might be easier if she helped with some cleanup. Michelle quite enjoyed this writing course last year, and when she took Kayla's paper, she got a little carried away. Though her contributions made it a very high-quality paper, she made substantive changes to Kayla's original draft. Kayla was thrilled to submit a paper so strong and handed it in confidently. Kayla's instructor noticed something was a little off. Kayla has such a hard time in the class, how could she have put together something so polished? The instructor thought some of the themes sounded familiar, and though it took some digging, realized that this voice was one of a past student and not of Kayla. When confronted, Kayla didn't think she had done anything wrong. She'd written a draft that was not strong, she used campus resources for assistance, and asked a knowledgeable friend to help her do better. She recognized her shortcomings and asked for help, just like her advisors told her to do. So, is this academic misconduct? What went wrong? And etc. So, folks who had this case in the back.
Our group talked about it being an educational opportunity between the professor and the student Kayla. She's in her first semester of her freshman year, so she's pretty new. And we also thought it was a learning opportunity for Michelle as well. If she took the class last year, she might be a sophomore. So perhaps she's not as far along in her college career either. We also talked about potentially considering good intentions as part of this case study. But it just at the most basic level, it should be laid out the acceptable uses of other people's words and the importance of using your own words, originality in your work.
Thank you. You have a mic. Great.
Yes, basically what Table 8 just said. But we do agree that this is academic misconduct, basing that on the idea that the conduct code exists to ensure academic integrity, to ensure that students are submitting their own work, and clearly the student was submitting something that was not her own work. But we do believe that there is an immense opportunity here for a teaching moment, and it would be a shame if it turned into a punishment. The student would not, getting a punishment would not know what to do next, not know how to act when presented with a similar situation. So basically a teaching moment for the student. We did agree that Kayla's friend Michelle should be spoken to, so it can be clarified for her how she can support her friends that need it. And then the final question there is, would this be any different if English were not Kayla's first language? We believe it would be very different because there would be much more of a learning curve for the students, for Kayla, and then therefore resulting in much more of a teaching opportunity for the faculty members. So we didn't feel that this should go to a committee, that we did feel that the faculty could work with Kayla, and perhaps someone could talk to the friend.
Thank you. Who was the other table that had case 2?
Yeah, we didn't say much different, except that, we felt that both Kayla and Michelle were in violation. Michelle of point B and Kayla of point B and Michelle of point F in the code. But also that, Kayla's, if you're going to charge Michelle, she'd have to go to a hearing, which gets complicated. We were talking logistics, not philosophy of this question, but it's an interesting one because Michelle's not in a class that she can get a grading penalty for. So her case would have to, if you're going to charge her, would have to be brought before a committee. And then the sanctions, can be light or heavy depending on what's going on. But I think, especially since the course is a writing course, which spends a lot of time on how to properly write, that this is a big educational moment. And even more so for Michelle if she already took the course and still felt like what she did was okay. And we kind of started to just get to the tip of the iceberg of the ESL question and international students. But that's about it.
Thank you. Panelists? or Kabrina and Steve. You guys have anything else to weigh in?
Thank you. This seems to me one of those issues that the academic misconduct is the easy part. Clear they both violated it. The hard part is what do you do about it? I would think it would go to a hearing, without a doubt. There's a lot of learning to be done at these hearings. There's a lot of education at these hearings. But if the decision were mine, I would not handle it internally, between myself and the students. But this is one of those things that Steve mentioned, the murky. It's very murky because what do you do about it?
And I sat with Table 6 and kind of came to the opposite conclusion because in my head I built it in a way that it would be, where the faculty member would use this as a teachable moment and make a decision based on the information in that conversation about what would go on. So I didn't see it as an automatic moving forward necessarily, but letting the faculty member have the freedom to have that first conversation before any conclusions were made. I know that's not very helpful, but I think that's the first step.
Thank you.
And that I'm sorry,
please,
I
yeah.
can't let it go without adding one more thing.
No.
That can still happen if it goes to a hearing. The faculty member sits down with the students and hashes it out and what happened and why did this happen and, tries to hopefully get the learning in, it will still move forward.
Thank you. Okay, we've got 2 cases left. Case number 3, who had case 3? All right, so can folks who have mics run them over to tables 3 and the one in the back? Not table 9? Okay. So in a Fundamentals of Journalism class, students are given a major reporting project to do outside of class in the first month. Franny and Joey are friends, both first semester sophomores, and while both enrolled in the course, are in different sections with different instructors. They are also both very interested in the local music scene and happen to be going to the Boston Calling Music Festival the first weekend in September. They decide that they can put together a really thorough write-up if they work together. Franny writes up all the Saturday acts, Joey writes up all the Sunday acts, and they divide the bands playing Friday evening. To further collaborate, they both read each other's sections, help each other edit the parts they themselves did not write, and all told, the article is actually very strong, cohesive, clever, engaging, and informative. Impressed by the write-up, Franny's instructor shared it with her colleagues, which prompted Joey's instructor to realize that Joey had submitted the very same assignment. So, is this academic misconduct? And similar questions to those we've been asking before. So, table 2, table 9, anybody want to start?
I can go.
Okay.
So we decided this was academic misconduct. Students do not get to do the assignments that they want to do. They need to do the assignments that were assigned. And we felt...
She's so exacting.
But we felt that potentially because it was a first offense, because it seemed like the work and the sharing was in good spirits, that the instructors could potentially handle this as a grading infraction. If there was any indication, though, that Franny or Joey were being victimized by one or the other, then we thought that would automatically go to a hearing if there was some, imbalance in the way they handled this.
Thank you. Table 9?
We were of the same mind. It's pretty straightforward that it's academic misconduct. Spent a little bit more time sort of talking about what could have been done to prevent the misunderstanding in terms of specificity in the syllabus, discussing what was legitimate collaboration, what wasn't, talking about those sorts of things, more preventative actions. But we agreed that it is academic misconduct, that probably handling it with the faculty member, respective faculty members, was appropriate, and perhaps a grading penalty. That's as, did I reflect? Okay.
Thank you. Stephen, Kabrina, anything to weigh in on this one?
You can go.
Sure, I agree. I think that, and more faculty are being very explicit in when they say we want you to collaborate, then they're being very explicit in what that means. And I think that goes a long way, and it's important to note that. But it is misconduct, and the sooner they realize that as part of this process, I think it'll serve them well moving forward.
Can I add something? So I agree that it's clearly a case of academic misconduct. Sorry. I agree that it's a case of academic misconduct, but I do wonder about our drawing the line in collaborative work. What would have been so terrible about this if collaboration as a teaching tool, which I think needs to be used more at this university, I think they did a great job at what they were doing. If collaboration had been permitted, this would have been fantastic. They each took part of the assignment. They each read each other's work. They handed in a collaborative piece of work. Where is the learning missing from that? Perhaps it's on our side, not on the students. Perhaps we can't allow collaboration more than we do. And a colleague of ours in the Department of Chemistry once suggested to me that because of his experience at an undergraduate institution that did allow collaboration, but only if the students acknowledged it in their work. I mean, I find it hard to believe that these students didn't acknowledge that they collaborated. But why do we have to be so firm on this? Why can't we change our perspective a little bit? And in fact, when we have students working together in a laboratory, for example, which happens all the time in the sciences, say, you know, maybe we should allow them to do some of this in a collaborative fashion. I think what they did was probably a superb piece of work and showed that they could work as a team. So although technically I agree this is academic misconduct, I wonder if we can't shift our model a little bit to permit such things to go on rather than always insist that an assignment has to be each person writes it his or her own way. And similarly, by the way, with that graph. It depends upon whether the graph was being generated, for example, through a computer program versus having to graph it by hand and really learning something from the graphing process. I think there are a lot of gray areas in this collaborative area that, you know,
Right.
when we're talking collaboration, that falls into what the panelists have called murky. But I just wonder if we need to rethink some of the modeling that we do. Because for those of us, for example, who collaborate on projects and write journal articles together, everybody's a co-author. It's an acknowledged collaboration. Who wrote what doesn't matter anymore.
So we didn't talk exactly about how that might have occurred, but if that were going to be the case, and again, it may go back to the syllabus and the professor and the coaching of students in these contexts, because if the students had come forward to say, we worked together on this is my part, this is his part, and we have all the data for this and all the drafts, and we'd like to submit the same paper, and do that before the fact. I think there's no problem with the collaboration, but and we need to be broader in that. But we really thought that there needs to be more work on the part of faculty to think through what do I need to say and how do I need to coach the students in the class in that context, if that's going to be the case.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to say, I think the problem comes in assessment. That if you don't acknowledge who does what, then you run into the assessment problem.
Good point.
Great. Thank you. I'm very conscious of time, so we still have one case left to go. I will try to run through it very quickly, and then if people have to leave, I understand that's okay. Otherwise, we'll just try to wrap up quick. Jihu is a second semester freshman from Korea, and thus far has had a hard time adjusting. He's used to a very rigid structure, and he routinely blew off class and partied too hard. Jihu had a rude awakening when he realized he either failed or barely passed all of his first semester classes. Now he's on academic probation, and he realizes he either needs to get his act together or he'll be removed from BU. Not to mention he may potentially be forced to head off to the military earlier than he'd planned. And he's determined to do better, but he's not quite sure how. Jihu barely passed writing 98, and now in writing 100, things are not going so smoothly with his first paper. He consults with outside sources and impressed with their precision and relevance to the task at hand, uses long direct quotes from the outside document, but does not use appropriate citation. Upon submission, the instructor thinks the language sounds a little too advanced to be coming from Jihu and runs it through a plagiarism checker. It becomes clear that he plagiarized, and when confronted, Jihu is confused because in Korea it is common for students to copy directly more knowledgeable teachings, since he is not an expert and the sources he consulted clearly have intelligent things to say on the matter.
So we all discussed this, that we do believe it is still actionable because WR 098 covers plagiarism in writing. That's what it is. It's a writing course specifically for students that are struggling a little bit extra and couldn't get right into 100. Also, if he attended international orientation, they discussed that extensively, just because a lot of students do come in thinking that it is okay for that to do. It's not his first semester, it's his second semester, and now he's in WR 100, where it's also in the syllabus, and it's also discussed because, again, it is a writing class. We discussed, we thought it would be appropriate to stay at the level of the instructor, and the instructor take this as a teachable moment, speak with the student about possibly, we had one person who said, give the student a 0 grade, sit down, have a discussion about this specific assignment, see where the student didn't understand what was going on, and hopefully move past it. Unless it wouldn't have gone to a hearing unless the student denied it completely. I'm trying to rush through what we talked about. So if we were the academic advisor, then hopefully previously during the first semester while WR 098 wasn't going so great, we would have had a discussion about whether or not WR 100 was appropriate for the following semester. But obviously that discussion didn't happen. Also a discussion about if it's going to committee, if you're going to deny it, what can and can't happen. It could be a lot worse than if the instructor had said, I'm going to give you a 0, let's sit down and talk, let's see what we can do to help you figure out why you don't understand. Lastly, what we also discussed about is BU as a whole. Are we doing our international students a disservice by not making sure that they clearly understand this part of the academic conduct code as plagiarism, because a lot of students do come in. Some schools have a higher number of international students. So if the advisors are meeting with the students, professors realize that maybe this is something that needs to be stressed a little bit more. You're not going to get every student. They may not understand. They may not go to these orientations or things that you have. But we felt that understanding that as a problem might help, because somebody at our table said that they do see a lot of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, our table, who all deserted me, reiterated all those concepts. I guess, but some had experience in this area and recognized that in the educational system from which they came, there's a ton of rote memorization apparently, where they're in their classroom, they're not even used to faculty members like circulating around the room. They are used to somebody standing at a podium and reading from a textbook, so their experiences in the classroom are totally different. So recognizing clearly in the writing courses, they would have been explained about plagiarism, but again, second language, apparently, right? Second language, so did they hear it or not hear it? So our instructors felt that this was, well, one, if it was the first offense, truly, he was tanking in the first class, so why didn't he cheat then? Which makes you think that he knew it was wrong. There's just one thought, maybe it was or wasn't. Not really sure if he knew it was wrong. But the suggestion was to give him an opportunity to write it again for lower grade in a short time window and go through that teachable moment process.
Thank you. Any last words to add from the panel?
No, I like the creative solution.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Well, please join me in thanking Kabrina and Steve and for their expertise today. Thank you all for being involved participants. Stay tuned. There will be information on our next brown bag session, which is called Reality Check. It'll be an opportunity for folks to check in. More information coming on that. So thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you, Jarvi.